the always necessary relative ad hoc view, the secondary life and activities of man is not unlike the legal fiction of a corporation. And those of you who are fortunate enough not to have any sort of particular legal background to be encumbered, I'll give you a right quick description. It is a legal fiction, the corporation. There is no such thing as a corporation. It was done, among other reasons, the basic reason historically is now described as it was in the burgeoning growth of commerce and industry in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, I guess. Well, it was going on before then, but never mind, that's not a history lesson. It was to raise money so that there would be numerous investors, but so that you would not be held responsible. If somebody said we're going to start a new steel mill and we'd need money and we'd probably get rich, and would you like to buy a third of it? And you say, yeah, but I ain't got time to fool it. And they say, well, you don't have to. All we need is the money. We got people to run it. But after a little experience, we found out that people did not want to be held responsible. That is, if they put out bad steel and the bridge collapsed, and people who got killed want to sue, then they come looking for who owned the Mickey Mouse Steel Company. And so here's a guy that perhaps lived in Europe, South America, that owned a third of it, and they're going to hold him responsible. It came around that legally there is a fiction known as a corporation, which is whether you ever thought about it or not. General Motors. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people own stock in General Motors, but there is no such thing as General Motors. Now, if you see pictures of the factories and the testing tracks up in Michigan, if you think that's General Motors, you're wrong. General Motors may certainly own that. It may be assets of General Motors, but there is no General Motors. There's none. You can't find his assistant. Colonel upheaval, major upheaval. There is no such thing as General Motors. And the thing is, with a corporation, part of what I want you to see, the one part, that and somebody here on the street that owns a little dress shop, if they got any sense and they have much business, they'll form a corporation. Because the thing is, the corporation does not exist as an individual, and those who own stock in the corporation are not the corporation. That if your General Motors car blows up, you cannot go to the stockholders. It might be your grandmother, your next door neighbor. You cannot go sue them. In the same way that if you go into this dress shop down the street, it's owned by one person, but they've incorporated. If you go in there and trip and you break a leg and you've got a good legal basis for suing the person, if indeed you win a judgment against them, it will not be against the person. It will be against the corporation. They are separate. It was to protect investors so that people would invest that were not going to actively be involved with it, didn't have time to follow the everyday affairs of the corporation. It is known in the law as a legal fiction. In other words, it doesn't exist, but the law treats it like it does. It's subject to all kinds of other things I'm not going into, and it runs a little thin line in various ways and places I'm not going into, that the corporation, if you just sit there and read about some of the laws concerning corporations, oftentimes you'd say, well, the thing, they're treating it right here as though it is a person. It gets that close. But when it gets down to it, there is no such thing as a corporation. It is known as a legal fiction. Now, the secondary activities of humanity can almost be seen from a certain ad hoc view as being a corporation. It's a legal fiction, oftentimes known as the individuality of man, man's personality. In other words, it's real, but it's not real. There is a General Motors, although I said there's not, because you can call your broker and say, I want to buy X number of shares in General Motors, and he can go get them for you and deliver them to you in person, and you own whatever percentage that represents. You own that much of General Motors, although there is no such creature as General Motors. So, you see, it exists for some purposes, but for other purposes, it does not exist. Another thing about the corporations, under certain conditions in certain areas of the world, it is, I don't get this too technical, but it is possible that the real owners of the corporation can hide. It's kind of a tricky thing, but under certain conditions, you can have a corporation. You fall down and hurt yourself somewhere, and you can find out who owned the building. You went into the XYZ dress shop, and you can check there in the state and most throughout the world, as far as I know, and somebody in the bureaucracy somewhere will have an application for a charter for XYZ Corporation. There'll be some names, but under certain conditions, certain places, it'll just be attorneys' names. Or they can run it through all sorts of complicated, that one corporation owns another, and they can run it through all over the world and get so lost in the paper flood that in a sense, just trust me, in a sense, the true owners can hide behind the corporate veil, behind this corporate shell, this legal fiction, this facade of the corporation. The true owners can hide. All right? Does that sound familiar? That running humanity, that running the individual corporation is almost, from certain views, like the hidden true owners of the corporation. And nobody can get their hands on them. You can't find it. Now people try, they imagine. They imagine all the way from the ridiculous to the super ridiculous. Now for those of you that are more accustomed to historical lyricism, from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I like from the ridiculous to the doubly ridiculous. That is, holding each individual responsible, that's the power behind it, to holding the gods responsible. The real owners, the real owners of the corporation could be seen as the primary needs and forces of life itself. And you can see them as indeed hidden, because there is a workable parallel from this kind of relative view between the secondary activities, the secondary interests, the secondary life of humanity, just almost above the visceral level. Everything else going on, apparent human emotions, the activities of the cerebral cortex. You could look at all of that, as necessary as it is, because to do business in this day and time, a corporation is necessary. Now you can go naked, you can go and open up a business and just you own it. With no corporate protection, you can do it, but you're, to say the least, you're an idiot. You don't have the high end of the nervous system operating. You're a fool, because then you're a person responsible for everything. In the same way, if you can follow this, an individual man here and there can operate without the secondary activities, that he can operate almost just from the visceral level. There are hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people right this second that are operating on no higher level than that. People in hospitals, people under psychiatric care, people in comas, people that were born in comas. Life can tolerate that. But that is not the norm. What life normally has, look at every individual as being a potential business. He incorporates everybody, or she does. Life incorporates. That is, it makes humans operate at a secondary level, somewhere above the visceral level. It develops physiologically, running up through the, I guess I would call it the limbic system, into the cortex. That although there are parallels in other animals, and especially mammals, you do not have the nervous system, you do not have the corporation acting in such a way, in a parallel way, that if you took another mammal and it injured its nervous system in such a way that what would be the highest end of its nervous system, something parallel to its cortical functions, we were talking about higher chimpanzees, let's say, the higher apes, it would still be serving its general purpose in the transfers of energy. It might die very quickly, but a human can stay alive, but it is not serving the full purpose of its corporation without these secondary activities going on above the visceral level, above the corpus salus, the bare minimal, keeping the body alive, keeping life itself alive through humanity. Everything that goes on above the visceral level can be seen as a kind of legal fiction. It can be seen as a kind of absolute necessity / and a pleasant illusion. There is I see that striking some of you people's cortex in a stickier way than I thought was going to be on my verbal fingers tonight, but all right, there's another. Let me try this. This information, the realization of this, as always, if you know how to look, has seeped out throughout history. This may make it stickier, but here I go. There has been, it's almost gone now in this verbal context, it's still around, but there was, especially during the medieval period into the Renaissance, the question there would seem to be in some given state, jump back and forth now that we're actually talking about some state, some part of the body politic, or whether we're talking about you, the individual. The question of whether the throne, in quotation marks, whether the throne in some given area was the power, or was the person on the throne, the king, personally, was he the power? Apparently wars were fought, people killed over that. That is, that especially came about this way, that whatever king happened to be on the throne announced that the throne as an institution was not the real source of power. He was. That this was just the medium. I am the active force, the individual. If you can see, there is the information about man's apparent individuality is tied to this, was reflected in that, as to whether what seems to be your individuality, that is your personality, as a king, as an individual, a living entity, that I am King Fred III, is that the power, or is the power the throne, the monarchy? That is, if Fred drops dead tomorrow, if somebody gets tired of him and kills him, are we going to fall apart in one group of people? That is one part of life's body at that time and that place went, no. He's got a brother, he's got a son. If he doesn't, we'll get somebody else. Because one man, an individual, is not the power. It's the throne. That is, it's the institution. There is a parallel situation with people, individuals. Is it your secondary level in some way? Is that what is actually running you? Is that the source of your power, your direction, your plans? Or is it the institution of man's apparent individuality? Now, I told you it might be stickier. Well, let's keep riding. Maybe we can circle back before you notice it. You could look at the life breath, you could look at it as being the white bread of the minimal level of survival, the visceral existence of humanity. You could look at its very life, breath, as being habit, routine. Then you can look at the secondary activities, that which would be above the visceral level, the apparent human, the singular human emotions and human thinking. These youngsters keep trying to imitate their elder. That is, there is a running struggle to keep anything above that level, to keep thinking and human feeling from simply lapsing into the blind, which is unthinking, comfortable lap of habit, because the system is wired up in that manner. If you can look at it as thinking and feeling and physiologically even, as I keep hinting to you, there is a basis for all of this. It just doesn't sound as exciting. And if I used it too much, you'd get distracted But you can look at the life of the body, you can call it anything you want to, man's physical nature. But above that, in the nervous system itself, like I keep telling you, there's nothing strange about this, there's nothing exotic. Through the nervous system itself, the secondary level gets represented, or is a reflection of, at the physiological level, of going above anything that is literally just the visceral level that you would have absolutely in common with a possum, with a dog, with a hippopotamus. Those creatures who have a higher nervous system, and it would be somewhere in the middle of this planet, they turn into having a protective limbic system that carries information outside of just the automatic visceral reaction of apparently the organism to the environment. But you have to get into man to where it gets into having a cerebral cortex that the information that would seem to be the passions of lower animals becomes the emotions of man, because you cannot stop at simply having the nervous system begin to operate and regulate the internal functions vis-a-vis the apparent external stimuli. You've got to be able to think about it. That is, you can't be emotional unless you can think about it. You cannot have secondary manifestations of either thinking or feeling without both, because you can't have thinking unless the nervous system has already gone through the area where it's possible to have human emotion. But then you can't have human emotion until you go ahead and have the ability to think, because if you do not feel something until you think you feel it. You have the sensation of it, but it's not a human emotion. You cannot have any human emotion. You cannot have sympathy for your fellow man unless you can think that you have sympathy for your fellow man. You cannot be angry at somebody over their political beliefs unless you can think it. It's impossible. Now, it's not impossible for you to hit somebody in the nose immediately that hits you in the nose. That requires no thought. It requires no human emotion. It is a visceral reaction. It is that's what I was referring to in my little made-up term, corpus salus. It is the survival body. It would be from below that blue line of just you operating at the level at which you would have in common, at which you would be living in common to other creatures. Below the line, at the primary level, at the very basic level at which you have got to operate to stay alive in life's body, the nourishment, the health, the well-being, the feeding of the primary level, it's a simple word. It's habit. And there's nothing wrong. It is the most efficient food. Anyone who doesn't know that, not only do you probably not belong here, but you're in danger constantly, if you hadn't noticed, of hurting yourself, getting stomach aches, eating too much, eating too little, tripping. You are not a healthy specimen, even at the most visceral level, even at the most mute, even at the most animalistic level. You are not a healthy specimen. It's not my business. Life knows what it's doing. Habit. You have got to simply, you should be able to see that fairly easily. What you would think of ordinarily as just your physical life, you might even think of it as your physical habits, are very attuned, are absolutely in line with a helpful existence if we were talking about something without secondary manifestations, if we were arbitrarily, artificially, and erroneously, but in a telling manner for this purpose, cutting man off to where he had no thinking and no human emotion. Then below that line, the salvation, the health, the proper food is habit. Look at any animal. You should be able to hear that, but you should be able to feel it yourself. It is just part of ordinary general health. It's for your physical activities, the time you get up, what you eat, the kind of exercise you get. Whatever is the sequence in which you do your exercises, or whether you shower before you go run, whether you eat before you run the first thing in the morning, whatever it is, habit is the mother's milk of health at that level. It's just the beginning and the end. There's nothing else to say. Those who seem to be crippled at that level, if you would notice, it is not that the lack of habit is what causes it. It's not that simple. There's not that lineal effect. But they are not in the mode of physical, habitual behavior. Consider that a real sticky, double sticky sidestep the way things are going tonight with you people. Because it's not that that's what causes it, but it just shows you the breakup of the pattern, the general pattern of the health of life through man, that habit, routine, is just the good old mother's milk, white bread, good clean breathing at the visceral level. Anything below the human emotional and thinking level. But now, at the secondary level, when you get into the thinking and human emotion, under all ordinary conditions, these upstarts, younger than the low end of the nervous system, how does every generation, if we're ordinary people, how would we say does every generation learn their lessons? They imitate their elders. It is moot for me to make any apparent comment as to the worthiness under ordinary conditions of habitual thinking and habitual feeling. It serves the same kind of purpose that it does generally for life, for people to behave as they do all the way from the top to the bottom, that is, from their habits, their physical routines, to their opinions, to their so-called beliefs and feelings. But now, talking about people trying to be a member of this great organization, you have got to realize that it is almost an unconquerable desire. It is built into the system. It's not psychological. It's not caused by your upbringing or your environment. For your thinking and your feeling to take on the same dependency, the same nourishment of habit. It is safe. Now, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It is safe in the same way that I'm telling you at the less than human level. It is the safest, it is the most conducive to health to operate at that level through routine. For ordinary conditions, it's the same up here and the same as they used to think of as human emotion down in the little heart. Habit. It is comfortable, it is safe, it requires no effort, and it is the most conducive to city life for health under those conditions. Mental, emotional health, as they call it. To find escape velocity from that, to do whatever the hell this may or may not be, requires that you struggle against that, not at the lower end, which is not by any means naysay the attempt to make yourself feel better, to be healthier at that visceral level, to lose weight if you can and you need to stop some habit that you had, to get more exercise if you need it. It's not to say that. But there is nothing worthwhile, there is nothing conducive to health, and simply attempting to struggle against habit when it comes to feeding and taking energy into the body, just at that level. But there is, when you go above that level, you have got to struggle against it. And it is a horrendous struggle, as all of you know, that have tried to do anything. There is another aspect. Maybe I can drag this and we'll circle around even further to the beginning, that you can see in this, in my present descriptions. anything that is not absolutely necessary, immediately necessary for the corpus salus, that is, for the health and survival of you, if we could cut off your thinking and your emotions for a second. Anything above that level, that as far as you individually, not the race of humanity, because that's not what we're talking about, but for you individually, in the same way that life can tolerate X number of people right now who functionally, who operationally have no intellect, through whatever physical reasons, or have no human emotions. Hospitals, there are places where they're not even in hospitals. There are people alive, at least the physical level, they're transforming energies. Life has let them live X number of years for some reason. It can tolerate it. Individually, life could not tolerate what I'm talking about. Is why this has such limited, all right, I'll say appeal again. So understand where I'm starting this particular trek. That anything to you individually that is not immediately necessary for your survival, for your minimal survival, that is food, shelter, etc., right this second, water, sleep, you can look at that as being entertainment. Truly. In ways that you never thought about, that I'm going to try and help you think about. If it is not of a primary nature to you individually, you can look at it as entertainment. Now in the city, of course, it is necessary. That is, for the broad spectrum of humanity as a whole, all of my divisions into primary and secondary, you do understand, are no longer valid. Because in the city, everybody, except these few that I said that life can tolerate, everybody else has got to be incorporated. Everyone else has got to feel that everything they do is necessary. That is, everything they do is primary. Their job, the way they look, the kind of car they have, it's not open to some sort of sarcasm or ridicule. That is necessary. So to them, there is no primary and secondary efforts, levels, purposes. But you can begin to see that anything individually that is not necessary for immediate survival, that is, all secondary activities, can be seen as entertainment. And a lot of you laughed, a lot of you reacted to based upon kinds of things I've been dragging you through for the last few nights, that you went, But now, consider what then falls into this category of entertainment. Let's just see all the ones I can think of right quick. Religion, crime, friendship, recreational sex, daydreaming, thinking of action, thinking of eating, thinking of fucking, thinking of getting in out of the cold, thinking of taking a trip where it's warmer this time of year. Is that enough? How about crime? Not somebody stealing now, right then that they're about to die. And with their final breath, or what might have been their final breath, they reach over and they grab a bagel out of a guy's hand staying right there. I'm talking about people out there, just crime, and they don't need whatever it is, let's say crimes against property. They're out there holding up a service station right now. They've been on a spree. Many states holding up service stations, and right this second they got gas in their car, they're eating, they got a couple of fifths in the back seat. Why do they do it? In the city, they've been scratching their head now for how many thousands of years about what are we going to do about crime, what makes people, what in the environment, what is it, what bad spirits, what odious humors get into the human psyche that make people do it. It's entertainment. That's what it is. It's a secondary pursuit, and it is literally a form of entertainment. A revolutionist motto could be this then, would be strict formal efforts in the primary and improvisation in the secondary. Now don't lose entertainment, what I said, because let me point this out. If you're going to be entertained, there you stand in line waiting to be slaughtered. There you stand in line eating and defecating and feeding something else, and then it feeds you back, and the cycle goes on, and you keep shifting along, and some people think, well, I'm getting ahead. I'm richer than I was. I'm thinner than I was. I got a nose job. I got a boob job. And you keep thinking I'm moving, and of course you're moving closer to the you-know-what, just right over the hill. Not the Arbiton, not the arbitrage. The feeling that you're moving. Anything that is not necessary to keep you physically moving. Anything else is what I'm describing to you as secondary. It requires food, and it requires that you stay healthy enough, let us say, that life needs whatever position that you were born into, your job position of being Fred X. Zimmerman, that it needs you, and it's got you down for 68 years, 3 months, and 14 days, and 7 minutes, and blah, blah, blah. So up until then, you got to eat enough, you got to stay well enough to live that long. And by and large, if you're down for that, life has got things arranged that it didn't have to check in, you'll by and large go right along. And so you're going to get fed, you're going to stay out of the cold, you'll get over either cases of small or chicken pox or the flu, and you keep shifting on up with everybody else, getting closer and closer. But for these 6 to 8 years, 14 months and all that shit, you got to do something, or you go nuts. And so you wonder, how do I look? Am I walking too fast? Did somebody break in line? You know, should I change jobs? Should I leave my present mate and go somewhere else? It is all a form of entertainment. Should I rob the person next to me? Should I worship the person next to me? Should I join their church? Should I burn down their church? Should I make friends with the person next to me? Or should I whip them? It is entertainment. Once you realize this, that the secondary level for you individually, and you can get by with it, or you wouldn't be here. If you can't ever do it, then it means you can't get by with it, and if you can't get by with it, it means you could never do it, and etc. But the motto could be, once you begin to understand this, there would be strict, formal efforts in regards to the primary. That is, you do not fuck around with your diet. You don't try to do strange things. It's not that they're wrong. It's that they're a waste of time. You're now turning a primary into a secondary. That's why I was trying to show you the other night about people going on a health food diet and die. That's not an attack on health food. It's not an attack on being healthy. It's not sarcasm. It's not irony. Except for the facts I pointed out to you in the city, the ultimate, the inevitable outcome somewhere of all activities, ultimately, inevitably, will be a form of irony somewhere. But that's still not what I'm talking about. It is that once you understand that you need to just give formal, strict adherence and attention to the primary level, then you understand what I used to mean when I'd say health is not a fit hobby. You do not fool around at the primary level. You've got to have some understanding of what seems to work with you and let that be habit. Make a little shrine if you've got to somewhere, since you're not religious anymore, and go from being a Presbyterian to being a habitualist at that level. You don't fool around. If you were ordinary and you took secondary activities as being important, like religion, people do not go into church and when a priest is not looking, they make an obscene sign at the crucifix. All right. Once you understand the difference in all this, somebody with real intelligence, a new kind of intelligence, you wouldn't sit around and think, well, let's see, I hadn't sat down and had 3 pizzas, let's see, it's 11 o'clock, in years. I remember the last time I thought I'd die and so I wouldn't do it again. What's the number? And you call up and you order 3. Or you say, God, I was thinking about just going out the back and relax, maybe have a beer. Nah. Hey, you remember the last time, hey, hon, what's that green shit you buy, that liqueur that made me so sick that time I almost died? Hey, I'm going to run down and get some. Can I get you something? It's not going to kill you. It's not do or die, but you understand what I'm trying to point at. You would take your attention to the primary level as being a habitual fait accompli, that I know what I'm doing and just don't fuck with it. There's nothing else to do. But you would give strict, kind of formal attention to that. All right? Then at the secondary level, once you understand the reality of this kind of division, as arbitrary as it is verbally, the secondary is entertainment. And to be properly entertained requires a kind of improvisation. Now, since I've used the word, let me see if I can stretch this out a little further from where the wagons are still encircled around you people's brains tonight, and see if I can drag you out a little further from the campfire. Entertainment. All right. A man is a violinist. He is playing a concert tonight. Now, I'm jumping real quick. I'm really tearing your brains away from even a first-order metaphorical campsite. He's got to pay some strict adherence to the basic requirements of performing tonight. He's got to wear a tux, assuming that's under those conditions. He's got to be there on time. He's got to bring his own axe, that is, his own violin. He's got to be there. He's got to be sober. He's got to know what the repertoire is tonight, what he's performing. But then for him to be entertained, let's forget now about the entertainment he's giving. For him to be entertained, in the city sense, would only come about through this, normally. It's really one thing, but I'll split it up so that you got two things to think about with a dialogue in your own head, right? The entertainment is going to come from his movement into it. In the city, oftentimes it's called soul and feeling and interpretation. But I'm telling you what it is. It's just this far above the visceral level. This is not in any way taking into account, it's no attack, and I'm not sliding technique. I should slide it because you people think that somebody is born in kind of a blank and then they learn how to play the violin. They had a little talent and then they practice for 12 hours a day for 12 years is what made them. Right. We got to turn the tape over just a second. Don't lose your place. Well, don't lose your mind either. At the ordinary level, my performer, his entertainment, his pleasure, but his entertainment out of it is going to be either through his, believe it or not, it's not much more than his visceral involvement. Although, I repeat, before I stop the tape here, I want to remind you, this is not discounting. He may be the creme de la creme of the current fiddle players. He may break your heart if you like Bach and Mozart played on a fiddle. And he may have practiced most of his life. But his entertainment is not much above the absolute minimal animal level now that he can do it. Or, here's the second possibility, it's the same thing. We'll give you two ways to chew on it. Or it seems to come about through his interpretation of somebody else's music. It's the same thing, but it's not. He's thinking somebody else's thoughts. He's feeling somebody else's feel. But he may be known in the city, which is fine. I might enjoy it, you might enjoy it. You might go to see him purposefully because he is known. Without question, he is now considered to be the living interpreter of Mozart's violin works. That he's it. That's what he's known for. That's his job. That's his position as food critic on the New York Times. Now, outside that secondary level, for somebody that might be involved with this kind of verb, with this sort of activity, in other words, real revolutionary entertainment cannot stop there. There has got to be a kind of individual improvisation. I would suggest, even if some of you, or many of you, don't believe that you're following this intellectually tonight, is what many of you suffer from. I'm not talking about the ordinary ennui or frustration of past city life. I'm talking about even now things that you attempt to do, and oftentimes or sometimes you think you're attempting to do them, in light of this, or putting on plays here, or whatever, that you think, well, I'm doing something a little out of the ordinary. But if what you're doing is only squeezing out, having the experience of the visceral enjoyment of moving into it, the playing of the violin, what they call the interpretation, either that physically is what you're involved with, or what would seem to be the renown, the recognition, your acceptance of the recognition that, hey, that guy is not just an interpreter of Mozart, he is the interpreter of Mozart. If that's all there is, you're never going to be truly entertained if you are a revolutionist, because what is missing is improvisation. Because what you're doing, I don't care, and Mozart, we're not here, I'm not here to badmouth the man's ability as a composer, but if that is all you're doing is thinking somebody else's thoughts, feeling somebody else's feel, or in this case, playing someone else's music, no matter how beautiful and heart-wrenching it may be, you are not being revolutionarily entertained. You will never be. Believe it or not, I'm right now going to apparently change the subject and then try and trick you in a few minutes if we don't run out of tape. Or if I don't run out. If I don't run out. For something completely different. All the many times, something completely different. All the many times I have pointed out how everything that is going to survive, anything that's going to have any discernible lifespan, will have resistance. No matter what idea, no matter what activity, no matter how safe, inspiring, whatever that it seems to be, if it's going to survive for any length of time, it will have resistance. Now, I've talked about that enough, used it along with examples, at my best recollection now, about 317 or 19 times, plus on your own, but now you should be aware of that, at least whenever you can remember it, that, there it is again. Should have expected it. Don't like it, but there it is again. I think it's time that I could be a little more specific about that. Things/ideas. That'll about cover it. They do not produce their own resistance. Now let me stop before I even complete that sentence to make sure that some of you are recalling how I feel sure that most of you have taken it thus far. We're at the Pro-Mozart Society. You are a member, and somebody stands up and says, I suggest we have been every night that we meet, here twice a month, that somebody brings their favorite Mozart recording and they play it after a business meeting, and we all sit and we listen and enjoy it. And yeah, they've been doing it for years. And the person says, all right, I have an idea. I think a lot of you, it's just an idea. We've been doing that now for many years. My suggestion is this, that instead of one person bringing their favorite recording for the night, I say that everybody bring their favorite recording, if you want to, every night. But we'd hopefully all of you have got it. Some Mozart at home on record, CDs, you'll bring it, and then after the meeting, we'll buy a bulletin board or a blackboard, and you go up and you write which it is that you wanted to play tonight. And everybody brought theirs, write theirs, and then part of the business meeting, it'll take a few more minutes. When we get through the ordinary business, then whoever's chairman or chairperson for the night will point and we'll vote on which one we want to hear. I'm just making it up as I go. That sounds safe enough. What kind of big deal is that, all right? But you do know that it's almost a certainty that somebody is going to fairly stringently, at least as vigorously as this person proposed the idea, that let's say that 3/4 of the crowd, 8/10 of the people there, going, geez, they seem to be truly indifferent. But there's going to be some resistance, and probably just as patiently as this guy, we're going to stand and say, wait a minute. Let me see if I got this straight. Anyway, there it goes. He may drag the meeting out. A whole bunch of people may wish that he had never even come up with the idea. He may end up wishing he'd never come up with the idea. The thing is, now listen, the ways in which I've described it before, the kinds of examples, I never push it any further. It would be safe to say, since ordinary people, that is, old intelligence does not even take this into account, what little I've mentioned thus far, that kind of example. But it would be safe to say, wow, once you begin to see that, then the statement could be that everything and every idea, every suggestion, every activity brings with it its own resistance. And that is true at an elementary level. All right, are we up to where I was in my first parenthetical insert into this perhaps almost infinite sentence? Things and ideas do not produce their own resistance. The powers, the forces that produce the original idea produce the resistance. There is, may I suggest to you, a fairly important distinction there. Of course, I tricked you when I said I was completely different, because now could I point out what I mentioned to you, that it's possible under conditions for the true owners of a corporation to remain hidden and yet to control the corporation, to control what's going on. Now humans, if I take a group of fairly intelligent people, I could talk to them about the fact that people ordinarily do not take into consideration the fact that almost everything you do in life, no matter how safe it seems, no matter how innocuous, or no matter how positive it may be, it's going to produce its own resistance. I mean, you go to a town meeting, you get yourself elected to the city council, and it's all your friends. It's just a little small place. You go to a town meeting if you're up in New Hampshire, and you think, well, I got one suggestion. I suggest that we pitch in and get at least one more sign down here, the little one place where our two main streets cross, saying school zone, because our little kiddies, our children, that we all got little children, we all love our little children, to make sure, because we only got 14 signs around there saying slow down kids here, and I think we need one over here where they're putting that new house, because anyway, then we'll have a sign for almost every kid in town. And you think, who can complain? It'll only take 50 cents from all of us. Now remember, I'm talking to ordinary people. Now I'll say, are you aware of the fact that if you get and did that, and everybody goes, well, all right, and the chairman's about to say, well, so be it, and before you can do that, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, Mr. Chairman, wait a minute. And they'll come out with something. And at first you'll be unbelievable. It'll be somebody you know that's got 3 children of their own, and the person will say, wait a minute. And they'll come out with something. Like, are you talking about where they're trying to build that new, where they've been grading over there right off of 4th Street? You go, yeah. And you say, well, Mr. Chairman, do we know for a fact that whoever that is somebody from out of town, and nobody, they begin to discuss, and nobody knows who it is? Well, I haven't even seen a building permit there when they started the grading. Is so-and-so here, the county who is in charge? They look for him, they say, has anybody applied for a building? It just gets, it gets completely out of hand, and somebody finally say, well, I suggest that we wait until next month until we check on this, until we vote on whether to put this sign. And you might be thinking, well, damn, one of our kids could get run over, and they're worried about some old technicality. It was, what the hell's wrong with life? Of course, normally people, I'm still talking to ordinary people, normally people say, what's wrong with people, not life. They say, why do people do that? All right, with ordinary intelligence, I could get some group of people or individuals to go along and say, you're right. I know that, I just never thought about it that way, but you're right, everything that life does, everything that people do, somebody else. If it involves more than one person, of course they were good, I'd point to them, they can, you don't need more than one person, because one person can decide something inside, and inside another person goes, wait a minute. We can't just quit smoking like that. Now, wait a minute. We can't go on a fast tomorrow. Let's wait until Tuesday. But at any rate, I couldn't do that with ordinary people. With ordinary people, I could get them to see, very likely, just for a few seconds, that everything that goes on in life that people do, somebody else is going to resist it. No matter what you come up with, somebody's going to resist it. And I could get them to go, well, you're right. And then I might even get them to say, did you know there's something sort of organic, there's something natural about this? It's not the stupidity of other people. They might go, huh? And I said, wait a minute, now listen. If you could think hard enough, do you realize this is just, I said it was mostly true, and most of the time. Would you believe if I told you that it happens all the time? And they might go, well, that feels right. And I can say, all right, doesn't that lead you to believe? I mean, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that this is not then some anomaly in life? This is the natural state of things. And they might go, ooh, wouldn't go much further, but they go, I might get them to go, yeah, that there's got to be some validity to that. That's possible. They would forget that within a couple of seconds, of course. But I could never get them to see. If you doubt this, look how hard it's going to be for you to remember this. Which you can hear it now. You can already hear that, let's say. I'll give you credit for that. But now to remember that it's not the thing, it's not the idea, it's not some activity that you do that creates a resistance. It seems to be. That is, well, he wouldn't have objected if I hadn't raised the suggestion, right? If I hadn't said, let's buy a new sign and put over there where they're building that new house, a new slow down children sign. If I hadn't have done that, then he wouldn't have stood up and said, I object, or I got some question. If I just sing there, he would never set up, when they says in more business, he wouldn't have stood up and said, well, I'm not sure that we should go up and put up this new sign until we check into the further. And everybody go, what? What the hell is he talking about? It would have never happened. It was my suggestion. It was my idea that produced that resistance. Yeah, if you believe that General Motors is actually a something. Yeah. If you believe that staying in line waiting to be cut down is a valuable form of entertainment. Or perhaps that your turn won't ever come. That they'll change the game. Or that you're so far back in the line. Or that you won't bore to death before it even happens. It would be impossible to get ordinary intelligence to see that it is not things, it is not ideas, it is not humans. And it's not the things that humans do that produce the resistance to the things humans do. It's the powers behind the throne. It is whatever it is that produce the initial thing, the initial idea, the initial action. It also produced the resistance. It's a package deal. You can't get this model without power steering. I mean, it just comes with it. Don't ask me how much more it costs. Don't ask me how much it'd be without it. You can't get it without it. Yeah, don't. So it's no use telling me you don't want it. It comes with it. Well, I wonder if somebody will resist. If I made this suggestion, I wonder how many people here in the Bird Watching Society, would any of them support me? Or would, well, no, so-and-so, I bet she'd object to anything, no matter what I say. If I say, I suggest that we vote next Thursday as Robin Day, she'll object. So, ordinary intelligence, even if it could follow what the little imaginary scene I made up, to say, well, that's true, things that people do oftentimes, or maybe all the time, or a lot of times, seems it will trigger resistance somewhere. Even if I could make, for some reason, ordinary people, ordinary intelligence see that, so what? Of course, they would say that to me finally, and somebody could trick them and say, and make them see that, and a whole bunch of people went, I can see it. I never thought about it. I can see it now. And I went, aha. They'd wait a few minutes or maybe a few hours, and they'd come back to me and go, aha, what? It hadn't changed anything. Because you could never make ordinary intelligence see this. You could never make the corporation, if General Motors if major upheavals or corporal punishment, if these corporations actually, if they actually existed, you couldn't go up to them. Since remember, they're fiction, but assume they're real. Well, I tried to tell you, I know as tricky as it is, some of you, I guess if I give you you might have thought more insight into the insanity of lawyers and the law. General Motors exists, but it's a legal fiction. It exists, but it doesn't exist, all right? So if you went to General Motors and you went blah, blah, blah with an idea, and General Motors went, well, and you think, I bet it's going to resist it. You don't realize that the same person that owns General Motors, that is, that owns the resistance you got to your idea, is the same folks that own you. See, the Fred Corporation. It comes with power steering. The force, the power that initiated what came out of you, verbally, or even in action. It came with power steering. You can't get it without power steering. That is, what triggered, what produced the initial something, produced also the resistance. It is literally a package deal. You're going to have to take coevally, simultaneously, at least into the fifth dimension. It's not maybe. It's not a split second later. It's not some afterthought, a millimeter of a second later. There is no real difference between what seems to be the initial thrust, the initial idea, and the resistance. It is only dualistic consciousness that sees them as being two different things. I was trying to drag some of you to this about 5 nights ago. The collective conversation going on in life's body. There is nothing. All right, I'm going on. You were making the suggestion that let's put up one more drive slow sign for our children over where they've been at new house. And this other guy goes, well, wait a minute. We don't know enough about even who owns it. We don't even know whether they got a building permit. As far as you're concerned, you being a reasonable, concerned citizen, the argument, if not totally specious, maybe it'll lead somewhere, but it is completely, in a sad way, it is a kind of non sequitur to the intent I had to help protect our children. The objection, even if it's true, is meaningless. Let's go ahead and put up the sign. All this appears to be a kind of conflict between humans, a conflict between a human who is reasonable and someone who's unreasonable, or a human. Not that you are totally reasonable and your good friend over there, farmer so-and-so, is unreasonable, but under this condition, your ideal is reasonable, trying to be more magnanimous about it. And his objection, his resistance, is unreasonable. Ordinary consciousness, ordinary intelligence sees them as two different things, and they're not. Do you not begin to get a glimpse every now and then that this is the nature of life? This is not some throwaway, I'm not being an apologist for life. This is the way things operate. If this sign is going to get put up, let's say that's going to be the end result, this had to go on. He was as much a part of getting the sign put up as you were. Now, you can't tell that to old consciousness, to old intelligence. There's no way. You can say, well, it got up in spite of him. No. To call it resistance is a misnomer. Every time I talk about resistance, every time I talk about many things I've never told you before, I bite the inside of my cheek. Not literally, but I do it somewhere else. Because it's not true. It's not resistance. The resistance is part of the initial whatever it was. The resistance is part of the growth. Death is part of life. Not theologically. That which seems to be the opposite, that which seems to be the opponent, that which seems to be the resistance to anything, whatever it is. If you can see it, if you can think about it, then you can name it. Somebody's already named it, or you couldn't think about it, of course. Then whatever it is, it has an antonym in this dictionary. It has resistance. But what you don't understand is is power steering on a car. But remember, it's the model that you can't get it without power steering. That's it. And so you may go ahead and take the car, and then you continue to bitch about it. Well, I didn't want power steering. That was the only way they made this. You can be bitching about it 10 years later, for all I know, and for all I care, I might add. And you think that still something was amiss. That some cars come without power steering. I've had cars that came without power steering. I saw another guy buy a model almost like that the same day, and he could get without power steering. And you can't realize this model, it's got power steering. Yeah, no, don't interrupt me. It has power steering. Boom. Yeah, but I want without. It doesn't come without. I want my ideas to go forward without any kind of resistance. It doesn't come without power steering. So you can complain the rest of your life. You can feel as though people have been stepping on my feet, my good ideas. In the same way that you can be driving that car, or let's say that 10 years from now, you've already been through 3 other cars, and yet there's the slightest provocation. You'll say, do you remember when they used to make so-and-so model? It was back, I don't know, about 89. I bought one brand new. Son of a bitch, I had to get power steering. Next 4 it didn't come. And you're still bitching about it. It's that same feel in everybody's intelligence. That in life, people are constantly making you do things you don't want to. They're interfering with you. That all good ideas, all good notions, all good feelings, all good desires, somebody is going to come up and say, blah, 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 which is a form of, I'm sorry, I'm your power steering and it comes with this car. Well, I don't want it. You got no choice. Well, sure I got a choice. Well, why do you say that? Well, because I can think of a car with power steering, right? And then I can think of one without power steering, right? There's a third possibility, which is no. Well, no, wait. And old intelligence says, wait a minute. There's only 2 possibilities in this particular case. That is, you either get a car with power steering or without. And you say there's a third possibility. What's the third possibility? The third possibility is you're wrong. And intelligence goes, no, I'm not. We're talking about cars and power steering. Forget everything else. Radios, and four-wheel steering, the automobile, and power steering. Right. All right, there are only 2 possibilities vis-a-vis this situation of putting up the sign. Any good idea I've got? Suing General Motors. We're talking about the car and power steering. There are only 2 possibilities of me getting this car. Big car I want. I can either get a car with power steering or a car without power steering. There is no third possibility like you say there is. What is it? And I would say the third possibility is, no, you're wrong. It's correct. It's just not true in the city. It's incomprehensible. That which is called resistance, that even I call resistance, I keep trying to sketch out to get you to see, but in my threat to, or in my promise that I'm closing up some part of what I've been doing, in case you hadn't noticed, I've been doing it rather subtly. It's not resistance. It's not in any way separate, except intelligence at every ordinary level tells you it is. In the same way that if I say this model of car only comes with power steering, your intelligence, I mean, we can be back to the grand level of 5th or 6th grade education, and even you can go, wait, that is not true, because I can think. If I hadn't actually experienced it myself, I can think about a car. I can do it right this second. I can think about that car. I can think about it sans power steering. So it's 2 separate things. There's the car and there's power steering. You can put power steering on it. You can in fact take it off. But you can damn sure make one without it. So there are 2 separate things. There's my idea to put up this new sign, and then there's his idea that we should wait until we check into it further. That's 2 separate things, because he didn't have to do that. You didn't have to put power steering on this car. You could have made it without it. You made this other model without it. Yeah, we did. Well, damn it, why didn't you make this one without it? It didn't come without it. Well, why did he object to this sign? I could have said, let's do it, and everybody went, bravo, good show, what a great idea. No, they can't. Except now we're not talking about now. No, they can't. I'm talking about that is not the life of life. That is the three-dimensional. That is the chief two-eyes version of what life is. That is the level of perception of old intelligence. That we could have things move along more smartly. If good ideas were not naysayed, resisted, debated to death, we could all have cars without power steering if we wanted them. Well, I hate to be flip, but we could all be dead if we wanted to. Anybody who just strictly cannot stand the fact that this model doesn't come without power steering, I think it was Kyroots or Browning or somebody pointed out that there's a certain kind of individual, isolated comfort, no matter how bad life gets, in knowing that the option of suicide is always available. That should give you some solace to, you know, if you just can't stand the car, you're driving down the highway, and here it is 10 years later, you still got it, and you're still bitching that it came with power steering. If nothing else, reach down the glove compartment under your seat and see if you don't have a pistol. And look at the car and say, General Motors, power steering, mandatory. Ha! You can always do that. There's another very tricky and subtle idea before the tape runs out. I might as well throw it in at the tail end because I don't know that I should ever try and drag you through this, at least while you still can recall tonight. The apparent resistance, and I tried to throw in a few minutes ago the hint that you could see a connection between that and the fact that the actual owners of a corporation, this legal fiction, this thing that exists and doesn't exist, the actual owners, not the stockholders, they can sell stock or not sell stock, but those that actually, let's say they don't sell stock, that whoever started the corporation never did sell stock, just got it incorporated, in their vicinity, their state recognized it, but then through whatever means, you can't ever find out who the actual owners are, or the owner. I tried to get you to connect that, since I gave up the facade that I'd actually changed the subject, that the thing about resistance, that somebody over here on the other side of the hall is resisting my idea about putting up the sign. The salesman or General Motors themselves are resisting the fact that I'm so mad I could spit over the fact that I want this car, but I want it without power steering, and it can be made without power steering. It doesn't come without power steering. End of subject. Can you see any connection between the hidden owners of the corporation and then what seems to be the activities of the corporation? That is you. The even stickier part that I was going to point out. Think about individuality. Think about your nervous system now having, we'll assume, as most of the case, and people that are ambulatory and can talk, that above the visceral level, your nervous system has gone up into the brain stem, and all the segmental operations of the spine are working, and your cortex even puts out little signals that they could pick up on a small crystal radio, perhaps. Let's assume all that is true. And look upon the secondary activities, everything above the absolute visceral level. Is you have been incorporated. You have been visited now. You can now think. And now that you can think, you can have human emotions. Here is part of what I would, just between you and me, and of course you few people out there, of a thing that the hidden owners under various guises have and continue to historically do. You have this thing that you think of as intelligence or consciousness, your individuality. And from day one, its gambit, its introduction to you has been of this nature, and it goes on now. It changes a little bit if you start to hear it too clearly. But it's this. It says, "Hi, I'm your friend, and I'm here to help protect you from your enemies who I brought with me." I was hoping that might get us somewhere. That's what I've been talking about for about the last 37, 39 minutes. I've got opposition across the room, salesmen, my own neighbors, ordinary intelligence, what you think of as consciousness, your personality. It's almost like the owners, the hidden owners, have sent this thing, and it says, "Hi." No sarcasm, no tongue-in-cheek. It's, "I am your friend, and I'm here to help you fight, help protect you against your enemies who I brought with me." It would take a very small, even old intelligence, after all I've said, if you would now fall into, wait a minute, I enjoy having friends, but what's this last part about to help protect me? Of course, it's part of what friends are for. I like that, but up to the end of that sentence where it says to help protect me against my enemies, yeah, I got enemies. But then that last part that you said, "Oh, who I brought with me?" Yeah. I'm glad to have a friend, God knows, and especially one to help protect me against my enemies, which I got enemies. But this last part about who you brought with you, I'd like to have it without that power steering part. It doesn't come without power steering. Well, it's got to, because I can think about it. Why would he object to me putting up a sign that could save one child's life? "Hi, I'm your friend. I'm you. I'm you and all your intelligence, your human emotions. I am your nervous system now above that kind of visceral, minimal, animalistic level. I am your friend. I'm you. What better friend? And I'm here to help protect you, to plot, to defend yourself against your enemies who I brought with me." That's it. I got an excursion, but that's it for the public tape. Are we back on? Are we back on? I've got an excursion, and I want everybody to do this faithfully. I demand it. Every day for the next 8 days, and those of you that are really foolish, you can do it as long as you want to, but I want everyone to do it for 8 days. That once a day, I want you to do an individual, a private, and try and do it total as much as you can. I'll give you a description of an improv. And I can give you for those of you that can take this approach, you can do it with song. If you got any interest, and do it off in private, so it doesn't matter that you sing, so that you won't frighten any children or scare the horses out in the street. We just take, let's just say that you're going to sit in the closet, this is the time you're going to do it tomorrow. Maybe you can play a little guitar. If you can't, just do a song. Let's take the good old Western version, like a good blues, that kind of poetic XXYZ. And the setup, I mean blues in the sense of the forming of the prose of what they sing, like I just make up one, but this kind of thing. And I'm not suggesting a subject. I'm just trying to give you an idea of this kind of thing, of the XXYZ thing that goes. I love my woman, she means the world to me. I love that woman, she means the world to me. But ever since we met, I think that I could never be free. That wasn't very good. Then, let us say, you're going to try to do an absolute improv just somewhere. I'm trying to give you a skeletal outline. Then say, I love that woman. She means the world to me. A lot of people are really impressive when you first meet them. But then as things turn out, everybody's about the same. Do you get the general idea? I've tried once or twice to talk to one or two of you to give you a hint. You could do it, or you could do it with a verse yourself. You could do it, you could take the, if you don't like the XXYZ, the kind of thing of the rap songs now, that you're going do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. But try your best, and it doesn't have to be a song, you don't have to even hear a melody, but to make up a limerick yourself, or to do it on the basis that you were singing a verse of a song to yourself. That just whatever strikes you. And you can start off with the kind of basis that you're stealing from the kind of stuff in the city. That I'm so lonesome I could lay down and die. I'm so lonesome I could lay down and die. But hell, everybody, I guess, gets a little sad sometimes, but some of them then go out and play. Find your way with it.